I guess if we can we talk about maybe your notes on militant poetics? You're going to be talking about this soon,
yeah, well, it's just attempting to think through how poetic thinking and poetic work is going to be responding to the current situation in terms of riots, in terms of strikes, in terms of actual struggle. And my starting point in it is thinking about how, say, the situationists in the 60s would say that the time of poetry is over, now is the time for poetry to be realised, and we act out these things that have been in these poems. Well, that's insufficient. It doesn't work. So it's trying to think through how the poetry would kind of transform without ever without losing any of its complexity, or without kind of selling out into some just pure agitprop nonsense or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
And also thinking about the overlaps between poetic writing and different types of writing. So poetry is not just sitting in a poetry room, but it's engaging within a wider field of political conversations. So you'll have kind of critical theory, you'll have full propaganda, you'll have poetic writing, and all of these have their own things to give, and they're all kind of equally important as contributions to struggle on an intellectual level. And it's really, you know, like a lot of people are doing, just trying to think through what that means for poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the main focuses in those militant poetics essays is the letters of George Jackson, you know, the Black Panther prisoner, Soledad brother, and in particular Jean Genet's introductory essay, when he insists that these letters are poems. And obviously they're not poems, but also you can kind of see where Genet is getting to with that, and that strikes me as being something similar. I mean, it's taking place at the same time as when the situationists are actually rejecting poetry, but it's much more sophisticated because it's thinking about how writing changes in moments of struggle, and it's not, you know, there's something, I mean, the situationists are incredibly important, but there is also something kind of a silly in this of like, oh, a week ago I would have written a poem, but now I'm going to throw a petrol bomb, and these are the same things. That's too easy. So thinking through those types of things, really.
And like the situationists, you mentioned the situationists, you mentioned Genet, and you know, like those folks, there's this clear articulation between what you're doing, you know, continental thinking, and also Black American poetries, particularly Black American poetries of the 60s, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my interest in the Black American poetry of the 60s is that it seems to come closest to those things that really that I worry over and work through. I find Baraka's work of the mid-60s really important to me, and not in terms of the usual narrative of, you know, oh, he's a bohemian and then he runs off to Harlem and he's this. I don't really care about that, but just the pressure that the work itself goes through. The poems in The Dead Lecturer, how they're constantly self-questioning of what it is he's trying to do with this poetry as this political commitment grows, and then they kind of burst through into something else. You know, it's like the you know, in the poem Black People, the poem on the Newark riots, when he has the magic words are up against the wall, motherfucker, this is a stick up, and suddenly that that transformation into clear speech. And also with all of those poets, David Henderson's poem Keep on Pushing as well, as attempts to speak about a social situation, that doesn't subordinate poetry into just some kind of a decorative cheerleading, but talks about it in a way that only a poem can. I don't really know of any other writing in the English language or that operates in quite that way, and especially with what's been happening in Britain over the last year, the riots of last summer and everything. Then that stuff has just been has felt very, very present for me. I did a talk last year when I was talking about Baraka's poem Black People, and how to read that in a period of social peace, like to read that poem in the 1990s, it would at best be a historical curiosity. I mean, if you want to go into all sorts of technical levels, it's not a particularly good poem or something like that, and it certainly expresses some rather questionable social attitudes. But then to be out walking around while London is on fire, talking to people, and then come home and read that poem, all of a sudden it's a light, you know. And so those writings seem very important to me. Plus, it's an area of American modernist poetry that is still not really talked about enough. You know, white modernist American poets, they'll talk about Baraka, but they won't talk about anybody else from that period. They're still kind of shunted off somewhere over here. You know.
And could you talk about some of the other figures from that period, in addition to Baraka, that you're interested in?
Well, David Henderson is the one that I'm particularly interested in. His book De Mayor of Harlem, which it's like 1971, and it's comparable to Baraka's Black Magic poetry, and it's an account of the city of New York in the 60s. I hate the word psychogeography, but it is almost a kind of a psychogeography of a type of New York, dealing with music, dealing with poverty, and being able to have a rage going through that work that is not just a gratuitous self-expression of a performance of anger, but just something that runs through it like a silver stream or something like that. I think these books are incredibly important. But yeah, everybody should read David Henderson's De Mayor of Harlem. Yeah.
This question of rage, right? This is central to your work, but at the same time, I've never sensed that your approach to rage and your approach to violence, it's not something you dismiss, and it's not something, at least in the writing, that appears to be disapproved of. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because it's not a lyric expression of rage. It's not a sharing, right? Like, this is, the poem for you, or the text is not the site of mediation through which you express your deep suffering and pain. Rage is something else for you, and I wonder if you could address that a little bit.
Well, I don't perform rage. It's one of many things that's happening in the poems, especially in Happiness and the Commons. I mean, an earlier thing like Phil Screed is basically just a scream. But the recent things, there's sorrow, there's laughter, there's about a million things. I think given my political commitments and given things that I've been involved in, there'd be something very wrong with my writing if that wasn't an element of it. The same with violence, political violence. I mean, we live within political violence. I think the least violent sentence in my work is when you see a Tory on the street cut his throat, because we live in a system of violence. Every time you look at the newspaper, and Ian Duncan Smith is talking about benefit cuts and blaming the weakest and the poorest in the society for all of the problems of the bourgeoisie and the very rich. That is ultra violence. it's all over the place. You know, for me to express violent desire, you know, I think Ian Duncan Smith should be shot. You know, I've got no problem with saying that, and I don't think that's a violent. But it would be a bit. You know, like I said, given my political commitments, and also given the fact that as a socialist and as a revolutionary socialist, I'm not a pacifist. It doesn't mean I would want to fetishize violence. I don't. I mean, I'll joke that Ian Duncan Smith should be shot, but I'm also aware of the problems of saying that, and I'm aware that kind of dehumanises me to a certain extent as well. But I'm not a pacifist. I'm a realist. I know that any real struggle would have to include sort of like some kind of level of violence, and if that wasn't in my work, then my work would be lying. It would be like you know, a fraudulent socialist group who are just pretending that we can achieve socialism by everybody just being a bit nicer to each other. And weaving a few baskets and eating. I mean, it's the one thing I like about Zizek. Actually, the only thing I like about Zizek is he is useful as a kind of as a provocateur of the liberal bourgeoisie. You know, when he talks about, well, you know, when he says all, you know, really stupid shit about like Mao or Robespierre and people like that, and talks about the revolutionary terror. I mean, it's obviously nonsense what he's talking about, but he is at least pointing to this thing of, you know, you are talking about an absolute change of society. There's going to be resistance to that change, and that's going to involve some people, you know, some seriously unpleasant situations taking place. You know, and that's also not something to be looked at lightly. You know, I'm not sort of like one of those kind of you know, I'm not a member of class war or something like that. You know, I'm not about to start jumping up and down and just thinking violence is really great and laughing when a cop gets hurt. You know, well, actually, I'm not quite sure how true that is. But you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I mean, this is very difficult areas to talk about, really. Yeah.
And how do you draw it back into the writing you do, right? The articulation of apoetics or of your poetry with these concerns. You know, they're so bound up. You know, the work, you know, the writing you do can't be disentangled. But you know, what is it precisely that makes it not, you know, reducible to political tract or some kind of pamphleteering, right? Or some, you know, even you know, on one hand, a sort of academic theorizing, on another hand, you know, a sort of, you know, radical punditry. It's neither of these, and
yeah. Well, I think on a very simple level, in terms of writing the poetry, is I just make sure that it's there's a lot of different things going on in it, and there's a lot of different voices coming in. You know, it's like the Commons. There's a cacophony of people in there. You know, it's not just sort of like me going, "Hello, I'm Sean," and by the way, down with capitalism, something like that. You know, I mean, I work hard. I make you know, I write fairly complex poetry. I also do try and write books that can be communicated to people outside of the immediate poetry room, and in my experience of doing readings outside of that, I know that I do, which is important to me. But having said that, I mean, there's always been an element of the pamphleteer in my work as well. You know, and I've not got a problem with that. You know, I kind of try and have both. You know, I mean, a lot of the visual work I've been doing lately, like the memos on violence, those kind of collage things with typewritten quotations or whatever, and photographs. I kind of been thinking about them in some ways as working towards making political posters, something like that. You know, I mean, I don't think I've got to it there. I think they're a little too oblique for that. I mean, that's something I'm interested in. You know, it's like I was saying earlier on about wanting to kind of try and do away with boundaries between different areas of writing. I'd like to write a poem which is also usable as a slogan, you know, without which obviously is almost impossible, because they're kind of they're absolute opposites, aren't they? The poem and the slogan. But maybe.
Yeah. And you see this in I think the memos on violence. You approach this in many of the visual pieces. These sort of astounding reimaginings or recasting of what you know, a political poster could be, right? But there's the there's the memo on violence, and this resonates with me. It ends with the line, you know. The rich will only understand when they're running for their lives.
Yeah, it's from C.L.R. James. What's it? The rich are only defeated when they're running for their lives. You know? And I've got a picture of the Mau Mau over the top of it. You know? It's all fairly blunt stuff. You know, there's not a lot of subtlety in that.